Okay, we can talk later. I want to, Joe's already got the recording's already going. Don, would you hand her one of these? The little Advent devotional that I said if I was really on the ball, I would have had it to y'all before so you could have started it yesterday at Advent, but I'm never really that together. So, all right. So, actually this was a good breaking place to skip for Thanksgiving week, because chapter 21 is almost a standalone chapter. You could almost study this chapter by itself. As I was working on the questions for you all for the last time, I just couldn't help but think of Columbo. Oh, just one more thing. Just got one more thing we want to say here. We want to add just when we thought the story was finished, at the point when all the other gospels have ended, John there's just one more thing that he wants to share, he wants to add. And this incident takes place in Galilee. We know from Jesus' words to the disciples and Jesus' words to the women in the other Gospels that the disciples were to meet him at the mountain in Galilee. So the mountain, most scholars believe, is what's called the Mount of the Beatitudes, the mountain where he gave the Sermon on the Mount. But we know, and I know people, I even used this yesterday, I know people probably get tired of hearing me say this, but these are real events with real people in real time. And so, because they're real, they involve real travel. You're not just in Jerusalem, and then the next chapter you're in Galilee without having traveled from Jerusalem to Galilee. I mean, this is really taking place. So that's where we are. I believe they are, and we'll talk more about it in a minute, I believe they are on their way to that mountain. But they've got to travel to get there, and so it's not a one-day journey, so you're going to have to stop over somewhere. And I think that's where we are here. So let's look at the overview, and I have one other question I want to add to the mix. We'll skip that last question that's in the overview because we'll talk about it later on down in the lesson. But I want to add this question. I want you to think about this. If I thought of it, I would have put it in your questions. But do you think this is a story of miracles or just a story of events? I mean, not everything has to be a miracle. Some things can just happen. So when you read through this, and we'll talk more about that as we go along, but do you see these things taking place as miracles or as logical events, things that are happening? So think about that. So as you read over this, what questions came to mind? What thoughts came to mind? Why do you think John added chapter 21 after chapter 20 seemed to finish everything? At least with the other Gospels it did. So what's your thoughts on chapter 21?
I had 3 questions.
All right.
Verse 5, why didn't they recognize the voice of Jesus when he called to them?
Okay.
They recognized the distance, where they were out in the water, he was, 100 yards or so away and whatnot. But still, the sheep know his voice.
You'd think.
But, and then did Peter help tow the boat in, or he just walk on in the shore, or, that's just...
He didn't walk on the water.
Well, I know he didn't walk on it. But,
Did he just waltz on in and leave everybody behind?
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about Peter here.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then verse 13, when he broke the bread was the fish, why didn't he bless it?
Good point.
Why didn't he say blessing?
Yeah, you're supposed to say blessing. I mean, doesn't everybody hold hands and bow their head and say blessing before you eat? Right. Right, exactly. Good questions. All right. What else? Y'all are so quiet.
Well, I wondered, about Peter, or they didn't recognize Jesus' voice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. Anything seem odd to you?
I was wondering about the fish that he had already cooked,
Mm-hmm.
and then he had them to bring more
Mm-hmm.
to him.
Mm-hmm.
And, did he not have enough, or, was there another reason for that?
Right. Right. These things, because we've done lessons this way for so long, you all look for those things, those details like that. And I think that's very important. They're important to me because we just spend lots of time on those kinds of things. But what I think it does for us is when you read a scripture now, and I hope you do this with other scriptures, that you focus in on details like that. We may not always have the answers to them. Why didn't they recognize his voice? Well, we don't know for sure. We'll talk about some of the reasons maybe why. But your mind automatically goes to, my sheep hear my voice. And so that's good because over years of study, then things begin to tie together from other things that you studied. Other scriptures come into play, and you begin to fill out a picture of these things. So those are really, really good questions. As I read through the commentaries, first of all, scanning through them to write your questions, and then reading closely yesterday or a couple of days in actually getting down to the details. As I said in your lesson, and we will talk about it more in a moment, but I said in your lesson that this portion of Scripture is the most open to interpretation than any other I have ever read. The commentaries are all over the place on this particular chapter. There's all kinds of different ideas of what this means. Now, as we've often said, there's only one interpretation to Scripture. The problem lies in what is that one. There's not, I think it means this, I think it means that, I think it means that. We don't do that. We try to interpret it as it's written, as the words are. But I found something today as I was studying this, that we'll get to later, that I didn't see in any of the commentaries. And I went back and looked in several of them that I just kind of scanned over. And that's scary to me because I don't like to find something that nobody else has found. And I've told y'all before, when I think of something, I'll tell you this is my opinion. And even when I read something one place, if I don't read it in at least one other place, I may just share it with you and let you think about it. But I don't really share anything as I think this is fact unless I read it in more than one place, more than one source. And so that, it bothered me, but I'm really excited to share it with you when we get to that. But anyway, any other thoughts on the overview?
I still struggle with, here's Jesus among them, and I know this is, I'm trying to put it in terms of,
Well, yeah, we should.
but it's, hey, let's go fishing. Okay.
Yeah.
I would just be walking around and oh my goodness, Jesus is here with us, and it seems like, oh, well, then we went home.
Yeah.
Or now we're going fishing.
Yeah, we said that like, and they went home. They didn't have anything else to do. They just went home.
I don't know if that's just the style John writes, or there's that, or life goes on, and that's...
Yeah. Yeah, I love how he put that, and Peter says, well, I'm going fishing.
Yeah.
Just kind of like, I don't know about the rest of you all, but I'm going fishing. The King James Version says, I go a-fishing. I'm like, well, all right then.
Nothing much going on here.
Yeah, nothing going on here. We'll just go fishing. But there's so much about Scripture that, yes, it is pictures. It is very symbolic in a lot of ways. Very, very spiritual. And I don't want to go off too far on this tangent, but there were in the early church fathers, there were two schools of thought on interpretation. There was the Antioch school of thought, which came from, you remember when we talk about Acts, and they were in Antioch, and that was the place where they were first called Christians, was in Antioch. That is a very literal translation. School of thought. Everything is literal. It is factual. Yes, there are times like in the Old Testament where you have picture and fulfillment. The sacrifices were all pictures of what Jesus would do. That's not allegory. That's or I don't call it allegory. I've got just a picture of what was going to happen. But the Antioch school of interpretation was, and many of the church fathers followed that was very, very literal. There was another one that came out of Alexandria, Egypt. Now remember, Alexandria was the greatest library in the world, was in Alexandria. Alexander the Great built the city for the Jews that lived in Egypt. That's how the city came about. It was much more Jewish in thought. And so the interpretational thought that came from Alexandria was much more allegory. It was almost everything was in pictures. And, that's in a very small nutshell, that's the two trains of thought of interpretation. I have always, even before I learned that, I have always leaned more to the literal translation or literal interpretation. It says it was, John says, and Judas went out and it was night. Well, it was not because it was night. Now, there may be other things you can say about that. It was spiritually night. It was night in his soul. And you can do those things, but I believe you can go off the deep end on those things too if you're not careful. So there has to be this balance. So in this chapter of John, there is a lot in this chapter that a lot of the commentaries said was allegory or symbolic of something else. And it may be, but I think there's a lot that's just really real going on here. And that's what I found as I was studying it. So, okay, let's go into our question. So let me say this about why John wrote this. Well, did you think about that? Did you wonder why John added this in? Did you think, what was his reasoning for that? Did that cross your mind? Or what was your answer for that? Closure, right?
That he just wanted to spend more time with his disciples. I mean, it's always fun to eat with your friends.
Oh, yeah. That's one reason John shared it. Anything else?
I thought it was just like a PS on a letter.
Yeah.
Oh, whoops, I forgot this.
Yeah, I forgot to tell you about this. Yeah. And I was, yeah. Actually, and I was kind of struggling with why. And I picked up one of the commentaries that I really hadn't been using very often. I'd occasionally go back and look at it, and it was a series of sermons by R.C. Sproul on the Gospel of John. And the way he described it was just perfect for what it is. And it is kind of like a P.S. And I said, if you ever read a book or watched a movie where you were left when it was over scratching your head, well, whatever happened to so and so in that movie? They did this and then we didn't see them again, or worst of all, a movie that just stops, where those westerns right off into the sunset. We watched one not too long ago where they were in the middle of nowhere and they started off walking, and I'm like, well, I wonder how long it took them to get where they were going. But whatever happened, sometimes a writer will put an epilogue at the end of a book or a PS to a letter to fill in the gaps. This did this or this did that. And we know from the gospel writers, from all four gospels, that Jesus appeared to Peter at some point on that resurrection day. We know that also from Paul. But we don't have a clue what happened. We don't know what words were exchanged. We don't know, after Peter's very public denial of Jesus, what What words were exchanged? Did Jesus say, oh, that's okay, Peter, everybody messes up? So, yeah, we don't know what took place there. And we can't help but wonder. And I think, now remember, as we've often said, John wrote this some 60 years afterward. And so it's well after even the book of Acts. Well, actually, it's almost, I think, except for Revelation and John's 3 letters, it's the last of the Bible. And so John knows what a prominent role Peter will play in the book of Acts. So it's kind of like last year in our Advent series here at Huckleberry Springs, we did a deep dive into what happened between the end of the Old Testament and the beginning of the New Testament. I mean, they ended up in Persia, just coming out of Persia, but when the New Testament starts, they're under Roman rule, but they're speaking Greek. I mean, how did we get here? And so this is sort of the thing. John knows what a prominent role Peter is going to play. And he knows people are likely to wonder, how did he get from this failure of a disciple to a prominent leader of the new church? And so I think that was the reason for John's writing this. But John can't just jump into the incident of restoring Peter's leadership and Peter's role among the disciples just out of the blue. And so I think this first part actually sets the stage for that second part, which we'll cover next time, of actually the restoration of Peter. What's exciting about that is John, as we'll notice next time, John will have this major discourse, but again, he gives it to us in the form of a conversation. Just like he's done in all of his major teachings throughout his book, there's a conversation there between Jesus and Peter. So we'll get to that next time. So let's look at what preceded the conversation. So how does John begin the story? Look at verse 1. After these things. After what things? What is just transpired? After what things?
Resurrection.
After the resurrection. Obviously, after the resurrection, after answering the doubts of the disciples without Thomas there, and then the doubt of Thomas immediately, but it's not just immediately after these things. Remember, John uses that phrase, after these things, to indicate a period of time has passed. We don't know how much time. If you remember in chapter 6, verse 1, when he says, after these things, he's jumped ahead at least 6 months. And then after these things in chapter 7, verse 1, it's even 6 months later than that. In chapter 5, there is some unnamed feast that takes place. We don't know for sure what it is. I personally think it's Feast of Tabernacles. That's in the fall of the year. But regardless of which feast it is, there's at least 6 months that passes between chapter 5 and chapter 6, and then between chapter 6 and chapter 7. So when John says, after these things, yes, it is after things that have happened, but it's also a period of time. I mean, if nothing else, common sense will tell you it was at least after the time they were in Jerusalem and walked to Galilee. It's at least a few days, if not more. Now, some writers think that it was another Sabbath, or another day after the Sabbath, another first day of the week. There's no indication that it may have been. We don't know. But it doesn't say that it is. We know that it is likely way less than 40 days later, because in 40 days Jesus will ascend into heaven. So it's sometime between Acts chapter 1 and John chapter 20. Sometime within that 40-day span. And my opinion on it is it's early after that the disciples are on their way to that mountain after they've left Jerusalem. They're on their way to Galilee and to that mountain where they will meet. So all of verse 1, after these things, Jesus manifested himself again to the disciples at the Sea of Tiberias, and he manifested himself in this way. So John uses this word, and now your translation may say something different than manifested. What have we got?
It happened in this way.
It happened in this way. Revealed. Does anybody say showed himself?
This is how he did it.
This is how he did it. What'd you say, Amy?
Appeared.
There are different words for this. The New American Standard uses manifested. The reason John uses this word, or your translations use that particular word, is because the word literally means to render apparent. And John uses this specifically because he wants his readers to know for sure that this is not a vision. This is not a dream. This was not a spirit. Remember, John is dealing with, in John's day, he is dealing with that heresy called Gnosticism, which didn't believe that Jesus really, first of all, wasn't really a man. Second of all, he just appeared to die. And third of all, it just that when they saw him, they just saw a spirit. That's why we have Jesus eating with them so many times, because all of the Gospels want to be sure that we know that he's real, that he's eating. Yes, he goes through locked doors, but he's real. You can touch him. He is here. You can touch him. You can touch him. He's real. He wanted them to know that this is a real, living, breathing, eating man. He manifested himself. He rendered himself apparent. So, where are they? They're at the Sea of Tiberias. Now, that's odd. Why would John call it Tiberias? They probably didn't all travel together from Jerusalem. Perhaps they met here. Maybe we talked last time that maybe some of them, their families were with them because they were there for the Passover. They did all have the Passover together with Jesus, but probably they had extended family or family members that were there in Jerusalem. So they traveled together. They didn't, not all 12 of them, so they just didn't travel in a group. They had families, they went at different times, and maybe they had a prearranged agreement. We're going to meet here when we get to Galilee. Nathanael, we are told here in a little bit, Nathanael is from Cana. So Nathanael may have taken his family back to Cana and then came over to Galilee. And all the others taking their families home and then meeting here in Galilee. But John calls it the Sea of Tiberias. Now, why would he do that when all the other Gospels call it either the Gennesaret Lake or most often the Sea of Galilee, what we generally know it as. We know that it is the Sea of Galilee, but we have to remember the you that John's writing to. Remember, I'm writing this so you will know. The you that John was writing to, they may have never been to Galilee, but they knew that Tiberias was the capital of Galilee, and so it was the Sea of Tiberias. They could locate it in their minds where it would be at that. So John, in chapter 6, in fact, I looked through to see what John had called it at other times, and he only mentions it one other time in chapter 6 when he begins to tell the story of the feeding of the multitude. And he says, after these things, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. He clarifies it for them there. But John's readers, like I said, would know that Tiberias was the capital. So they would know that the body of water that was next to that would be this name. But just where on the Sea of Tiberias? If you think about a picture of a map and the Sea of Galilee and where it is and all the places that Jesus had been around it, where? I mean, that's a pretty large area. Just where on the Sea of Tiberias? They had to have known where to meet. So where would that be? We don't know for sure, of course, but given the fact that Peter will just take some random boat and get in it, it probably was Peter's boat. So logically, again, I think there are many things about this chapter that I think we could say were miracles. But I just think an awful lot about this chapter is logical. I mean, it just seems logical to me. It's logical. If Peter just takes a boat, he's not going to take somebody's boat that he doesn't know. It's either his or maybe James and John's boat or Zebedee's boat. I mean, it's somebody he knows. So they're probably very close to Capernaum. That's where their fishing enterprise had been. That's the place where Jesus had called them, where this event had where this great, throwing out on the other side took place those couple of years earlier. Maybe this was the same place where Peter initially surrendered to Jesus in that call in Luke chapter 5. And I've already said this, but one more thing on the timing. Some commentaries say that it was, again, a day after the Sabbath to emphasize the gathering on the first day of the week, but we're really not told that that's it. So think about who's there. Look at verse 2. There were together Simon Peter and Thomas, called Didymus. Now remember, Thomas is Hebrew for twin. Didymus is Greek for twin. Probably the people knew this man by Didymus more than Thomas. The disciples, of course, knew him better as Thomas. Thomas, called Didymus, and Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee. Now this is the first time that the sons of Zebedee are mentioned this way. We know that John never mentions himself. We know that he never mentions his mother by name or his brother by name. And this is the first time that he refers to he and his brother as the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples. So, who do you think the other two are? Philip and Andrew is the best guess, because these were the ones that were with, except for Thomas, these six were the ones that were with Jesus in chapter 1. They were the very first followers of Jesus. Andrew and James were followers of John the Baptist. They went and got their brothers, Peter and John. And then they meet Philip, and then Philip goes to get Nathanael. Some commentators think that Nathanael was Philip's brother. We don't know that, but at least they were very close. He went and got Nathanael, and you remember what Nathanael said. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? But anyway, they are there. And most commentators think that that's the other two that was there. And I found it really comical that J. Vernon McGee called this the convention of the problem children. Because when you think about it, these were the problem children. I mean, James and John, sons of thunder, they had hot tempers. Peter, well, that goes without saying. John, of course, he's the good child, the good brother. Philip and then Nathanael, I mean, these were the ones that he had to do more with. But John doesn't mention, really, these are the only ones that John mentions in his entire gospel. John doesn't give us a list of the 12 like the other three gospels do. We don't know why. Maybe he was just closer to these than he was the others. Many scholars think that at least 6 of the disciples were fishermen. We know 4 were, but maybe 2 more were. But we don't know. But maybe he was just closer to these. But now let's look at how the incident begins. So, who spoke first? Verse 3. Who spoke first? Peter, of course. Simon Peter said to them, well, I'm going to go fishing. So they get into the boat. The commentaries say that it's a definite article, the. They got into the boat. So whose boat is it? And as we said, I don't think this is just some random place on the Sea of Galilee, and I don't think this is just a random boat. I think this is either Peter's boat or Zebedee's boat. It's somebody he knows. I think this is the same place that Luke chapter 5 takes place. I think this is a very familiar place. I think this is the very place where they all conducted their fishing business from. Let's all meet here. We all know where this is. Where this is a familiar place to us. It just makes sense that this is the place. As we saw so many times in our study of Matthew, Jesus and the disciples, it struck me when we were studying Matthew. It seemed like Jesus and the disciples would go places and then they'd come back to Capernaum. And they'd go somewhere else and they'd come back to Capernaum. They'd go somewhere else and they'd come back to Capernaum. And I'm like, why do they keep coming back to Capernaum? And then it hit me. Supplies. They've got to restock before they go out again. They come back to home base and they restock again. And I think that's where these 7 met. Maybe they're waiting for the others to arrive as they go on to the mountain together. That's what makes sense. It's a logical thing to me that they would be there, and they got there ahead of everybody else. And Peter says, well, I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm going to go fishing.
Well, I mean, they have to have a means of income.
Exactly.
In order to get those supplies.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been their way of living.
Yeah.
So, we don't know how long we're going to be here. And
yep.
I know we keep saying these are real people.
Yeah.
Real times and real things. Well, I don't sit very well.
Yeah.
So I can feel for people.
Yeah.
I'm just sitting and twiddle my thumbs and wait to see what's going to happen next. I'm not very good at that.
Yeah.
And so, give me something to do.
Give me something to do.
Why can't it be?
Let me sew a pillow.
Right.
You might say. I would never say, but you would say, yeah.
But why can't it be productive?
Exactly. This is where I say the commentaries are really, really divided on this. There are so many commentaries out there that just blast the disciples for leaving their ministry and going back to their old way of life, and they're going back to fishing and they're leaving Jesus and
they have to put food on the table.
Exactly. There's so many things that is logical about this. And even the non-fishermen are not going to sit around, I'm not going to get in a boat. No, they go out there with them. Well, yeah, let's try this. Let's do this. But now, as we're already getting into that a little bit, the question I have for us to discuss is, why did Peter want to go fishing? As I said in the overview questions, this is most open to interpretation. And the commentaries are all over the place. Like I said, some say they were backsliding, leaving the ministry, holding to their old profession. Others, like you, said they needed money. And one commentary said even disciples of the risen Messiah have to live in the real world. Exactly. Even Paul carried his tent-making kit with him everywhere he went. We don't see it. So we only see it a couple of times in Acts. We see him in the marketplace, but we see it in his letters. In the letter to the Thessalonians, to the Philippians, to the Corinthians. I paid my own way. I did my own thing. In Acts, I believe it's in the first part of chapter 18, when he meets Aquila and Priscilla. They were tent makers and they worked together. No, nobody says once you become a follower of Christ, even if you have a vocation, even if you have a specific calling, nobody says you have to give up everything that you enjoyed in life to do that. Perhaps they were just passing time. Maybe they needed to bring some money in for their family before they went on. But maybe it was just a matter of, we don't know when everybody else is going to be here. Let's just go fishing. Have you heard other things on that? Have you heard sermons or heard any other teachings on why they went fishing? I was just amazed at how different the commentaries were on this. I think Peter actually had the attitude of, well, while we're waiting for the others, we might as well go fishing. I mean, like I said, nowhere does it say that once you begin serving the Lord, you can't enjoy yourself with other activities anymore. It's okay to read a novel. If you write and study like I do, it's okay to pull out a novel once in a while. I used to be a big fiction reader. I think I read one novel this past year, and I was in such a hurry to get through it. It just didn't bring the joy that it once did. Of course, I don't think fishing brought them the joy that it once did, but I was just in a hurry to get it over with. But it's okay to go to ball games. It's okay to do things you enjoy doing. And notice I asked you in the last series of questions, we'll jump ahead to that question, did Jesus ever rebuke them for going fishing? No. Was Jesus ever lax on rebuking them for things they were doing wrong? No. If they were being unbelieving or unfaithful or untrusting, oh, ye of little faith. I mean, he told them. So no, he didn't rebuke them for that. So I think it was fine. But I will say this about doing other activities. Once you commit to serving the Lord, some of the other activities you did, even if they may have been worthwhile things. Obviously, we're not talking about sin, but you may have been doing great and good things. Things that not a thing in this world wrong with. But they just don't bring the joy that they once did. I mean, I really used to enjoy my business. I really enjoyed working with customers. I enjoyed what I did. But there came a time that it just didn't bring the joy that it once did. There's just a difference in that. But so what was the result of their fishing trip? They went out and they got in the boat. And that night they caught nothing. J. Vernon McGee said that this was the only true fishing story that's ever been told. And again, I ran across some really interesting information on the method and type of fishing they would do. I'm not going to go into all that. I didn't write all that down. But it was fascinating. This one commentary that Messianic Jewish set of commentaries I got went into great detail about the types of nets they were and how they would throw them out and how the nets actually worked. And there was one type of net that would actually sink to the bottom and somebody would dive in and gather the nets up. I mean, fascinating. All the detail that went into this. And said actually most times there were actually two boats involved. That's why Peter and Andrew were in business with Zebedee. It took multiple boats to do this the way they did it. And actually, I think there's two boats here, as we'll see in a moment. But everything was fascinating about it. But John doesn't go into detail on all that. Just as they were fishing, and they caught nothing. So, you've been fishing. You all like to fish? Linda, I thought you had. Anybody like to fish? Do you like to fish? You don't like to fish? Used to. I used to. I had aunts and uncles that were, they fished a lot. And sometimes night fished. So you're fishing all night long. Let's pretend you like it, whether you do it or not. You're fishing all night long and you've caught nothing. How do you feel by the next morning? Tired and frustrated. And it's fun when you're catching something. Like, anything. We've seen those bumper stickers, I'd rather be fishing or I'd rather be hunting. And Joe says any day in the woods is a good day. But as I said a moment ago, some things just, maybe they thought it was going to be fun to do it again, but it just wasn't. They didn't catch anything. Maybe they were just doing it to pass the time. But what if there had been a big catch? No, maybe that would have rekindled their passion for it. We don't know. Sometimes our old life is easier. At least what we knew what we were doing back then. But now it's morning. And John said, but when day was now breaking, Jesus stood on the beach, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. So why didn't they recognize Jesus? Was it miraculous? Again, we got these two trains of thought here. Was it miraculous? They were prevented, like the two on the road to Emmaus, they were prevented from knowing him. Was it like we talked about Mary Magdalene? Maybe it was so early in the morning, it was, John says, when the day was now breaking, so it was still pretty dark. It's 100 yards away. Let's see. We're all wearing glasses except Dawn. Do you wear contacts? Oh, you still have young eyes.
Oh, no, I had surgery.
Oh, you had surgery. Oh, well. Who of us could see 100 yards away and tell who it is without glasses? They didn't have such a thing as glasses. I mean, this could be a very logical answer. It could be miraculous. But I just tend to think this is a very logical story.
I thought, well, maybe they didn't even look because the last thing you want to hear is somebody asking if you caught him.
If you caught anything? No, exactly. It may have been that. But for whatever reason, they don't or can't recognize that it's Jesus. So what did he ask them? Jesus therefore said to them, "Children, you do not have any fish, do you?" Now, as I said in your lesson, that some different translations render that a little differently. Some say you don't have any meat, do you, or do you have any meat? Different things like that. But just the word there, we hate it when somebody does that. I mean, when it's obvious you don't have any fish, or you don't have any game, or you don't have any of whatever you went after, and they'll say, you're standing there with nothing, and they say, did you get anything? Do I look like I have anything? No, we didn't get anything. Do I have any fish? And what did he call them? He called them children. Now, the Greek word here is paidion. P-A-I-D-I-O-N. And the literal translation of paidion is childling. And I said it's different than what Jesus called the disciples in chapter 13. I asked you about that when he called them children before. In chapter 13, he called them little children, and that was a term of endearment. That's not the same word, so that question is not valid. This word, though, this paidion, it is speaking to someone who is not quite matured yet. Someone who needs to learn a little more, a novice. Some translations say that he said, friends, have you caught anything, or do you have any fish? But a better word might be fellows, young fellows, although he's probably about the same age of all of them except John, but fellows, have you caught anything? And the tense of the question is just as it reads, with the expectation of a negative answer. You don't have any fish, do you? And you can imagine their tone of voice. No. I noted in your questions that different translations render this differently. Some say meat, some say fish. But the word itself indicates that it's fish, but it's the word for small fish. So it's not as obvious as we might think it is. There could have been some small fish down in the boat that you couldn't see from the shore. But he didn't expect that they had any. Of course, Jesus, he knew they didn't. But you don't have any fish, do you? You don't even have any little fish, do you? That may even make it worse. But now think about it. This was probably not the first time that they'd fished all night without catching anything. Now, we know the incident in Luke chapter 5. But I mean, besides that, there are times, if you fish, that you go fishing and you don't get anything. You just simply don't. They probably had many nights like that they didn't get anything. Not every fishing trip or hunting trip or missionary trip is going to be successful. So what did Jesus tell them to do? He said to them, cast the net on the right-hand side of the boat, and you will find a catch. So what do you think went through their minds when he said that? Wait a minute. I've heard that before somewhere. Maybe that went through their minds, or maybe they just throw it over to the other side. I mean, that was at least 2 years earlier. But maybe it went through John's mind a little deeper than it did the others. As we said a moment ago, I think this is the same place where that other incident happened. So you picture it in your mind. The other 6 of them are gathering up their nets and preparing to throw it out at the other side of the boat, and John's going, wait a minute. I know that voice. I know that phrase. So what had been the result both times that this happened? Luke chapter 5 and here. They got a bunch. They got a big catch. The nets were filled. The first time, of course, there were so many that the nets began to break. But still, the nets were filled. And they called in chapter 5, it specifically says, they called in the other boat to help them get the catch. Now again, is this a miracle or just a catch of fish? What do you think? It could very well be a miracle. One of the commentaries I remember talked about Jesus. This one really goes off on some tangents sometimes, but it said Jesus as creator could have just created the fish that went into the net, or Jesus in his omnipotence could have called the fish together. I don't know how the fish got together. It could have been a miracle, but it could have been logical, because there are commentaries that talk about that there are times when there will be someone on the shore that can see, in the way the lighting is, can see where a school of fish is that you can't see if you're looking straight down. So it could be a miracle, but it could actually still be very logical.
Or could it not be another means of him making them aware of who he is?
Yeah, exactly. And if it is, then that well, and that could fall into both of those categories of, because it repeats the event from before, and also because the amount of fish. Both things there. One of the commentaries, I think I already shared that, talked about the details of fishing, said that some taught that oftentimes someone on the shore could see the fish. So maybe or maybe not. But at any rate, they caught a net full. They cast, therefore, they did just like they were told, and they were not able to haul it in because of the great number of fish. Well, that does it for John. I mean, this is just too much. This is exactly what happened before. And then verse 7. That disciple, therefore, whom Jesus loved, said to Peter, and again, this is in the present tense, and John does this every once in a while. He said, the disciple whom Jesus loved says to Peter, it's the Lord. And so when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put his outer garment on, for he was stripped for work, and he threw himself into the sea. John is speaking, when he reverts back to the present tense in telling his story, it's almost like he's reliving it. He's there again. He sees it happen. He watches Peter just throw himself into the sea. So what is Peter? I mean, he's off like a flash. But why did he put his clothes back on? I mean, don't you think you'd swim better in your under whatever he's wearing? Some translations will say he's naked. He's not naked. He's not without clothes. He is in his undergarments. And you're going to work outside. you're going to work, you're going to toil, you take off, if you're wearing a suit, you take off your coat or whatever. He's going, why did he put that back on? If he was the one that was actually doing the diving in to bring up the nets, he would have not had that on for all that. Either that, or like we said, you're working outside at hard labor, we might remove as much as possible. And so, but why does he put it back on? Think it'd be easier to swim without it, wouldn't it?
Maybe it wasn't appropriate to come up on shore without the clothes on.
Could be.
It was a dress code.
There was a dress code for fishermen on shore. You don't have on the right kind of tie, right? And again, the commentaries are all over the place on this. I mean, we got all kinds of ideas of why he put his clothes back on. Some said it was improper to meet with someone without being properly dressed. Well, how proper is he going to look after he's been swimming in them clothes? Others say he didn't want to leave his garments behind. Others say it was just like that phrase that, gird up your loins. What they would do with their outer garments and gird up your loins, they would actually take the coat tail or the tail of it and pull it up between their legs and tuck it in their belt and make like pant legs so they could run faster. That's what that term means, that he did it like that, which meant it was easier for him to swim. I don't know. Some say he wasn't thinking at all. He just grabbed them up and put them on, which actually to me sounds more like Peter. Just do it. It says he threw himself into the sea. I mean, this is not somebody who's thinking anything through. It's just, you can almost see, I don't know how these boats were controlled. I'm sure they probably, I don't know if they had some kind of sail or something, but I can imagine Peter saying, "Here, you take the oars, I'm gone." And he's just gone, and he's out of there. And this is one time Peter got there first. So John stayed behind to bring the boat in. So, but how's Peter's response different? If you went back and read that in Luke chapter 5, how's Peter's response different this time than in chapter 5? Do you remember the story?
Fell at his feet, saying he was a sinful man.
Right.
This time he hurried to see him.
Yeah, he came to him instead of wanting to get away from him. That let me just read over that a little bit. Jesus had been preaching, and he went. The disciples, the fishermen, had gotten out of the boats and were washing their nets. The night's job was over, and so Jesus got into one of the boats so he could go out a little ways, and so he could teach better. When he'd finished speaking, he said to Simon, now catch that because that'll be important next time. "Put out into the deep water and let your nets down." And Simon answered and said, "Master, we've worked all night, caught nothing, but if you say so, we'll do it." And so they did it. They caught a great quantity of fish. Their nets began to break, and they brought it in. But when Simon Peter saw that, he fell down at Jesus' feet, saying, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." For amazement had seized him and all his companions because of the catch of fish. He realized that he was sinful, and he wanted to be away from Jesus. He just, "Depart from me. I'm not good enough to be around you." This time he does whatever it takes to get there as quickly as he can. I still think he's not thinking it through. But his reaction is, "I just got to get to him. I got to get to him." And I ask you in your lesson to think about, how is your relationship with Jesus different now than when you first believed?
Sweeter every day.
Sweeter every day, deeper, want to be with him, want to feel his presence. in the beginning, of course, for many of us, we were very young. I was about 10 years old, but still I remember it so clearly. I can about tell you where I was sitting in here, and the preacher would be preaching, and my heart would start pounding, just pounding. And I knew I needed to come to the altar. And so I did, and then went through the confirmation class, joined the church, but then even after that, many times, my heart would just pound. Marvin was pastor at that time. My heart would just pound. Because I felt like I needed to go again. I need to go again. You just feel this, of course, at 10 years old. I mean, how much can you know about sin at 10 years old? But just this weight of something I needed to get closer. So there's that difference. Now it's because I want to be closer. And as we said, it's sweeter, it's deeper. And Peter he wants to get there. He just wants to get to him no matter what. So what did the rest of the disciples do? Verse 8. The other disciples came in what? What's it say? What's it say? Verse 8. Came in the little boat. Wait a minute.
My translation didn't have little in it,
Yep.
just the NASB.
Okay. So, I'll have to go back and look and see if there's a different word for boat there. It might be a word that means diminutive, so it doesn't say little boat, unless it's a word for word. So, but it's the way it reads in the New American Standard, and I think it's in the King James, that it reads like it's a different boat. And one of the commentaries I read said that a lot of times these boats would have a smaller boat attached to them. You've seen pictures of that. It would be a smaller boat to run back and forth in. But they came in the little boat. But John doesn't tell us what happened when Peter got to shore. Why? Peter obviously gets there before the rest of them. He wasn't there. He don't know what actually took place. So they get to shore, verse 9, and when they got out of the boat, and when they got out upon the land, they saw what kind of fire? Charcoal fire, already laid, and fish placed on it, and bread. A charcoal fire. Why that detail?
The NIV has a fire of burning coals.
A fire of burning coals. Look quickly back in chapter 18 when Peter's standing around the fire. Let's see what it calls it, if it uses the same word. Because that's the very phrase that John uses in the New American Standard anyway to describe the fire that Peter's standing around there. I don't remember what verse it is. I just said chapter 18. He's standing in the courtyard of the high priest. Peter was standing around a charcoal fire. Maybe Peter got to shore and saw that fire, that charcoal fire, and looked into Jesus' eyes, just like he did that night. And for once in his life, Peter's speechless. But have you noticed the amount of detail? Amy, tell me when you find. Did you find it yet? Okay, well, just tell me when you do. If you notice the amount of detail in this account, there's a specific number of disciples who are there. They got into the boat. The day was breaking. Jesus stood on the beach. He calls them padion, little children, childling. He asked if they had any little fish. That's a specific word for small fish. They were to cast the net on the right-hand side of the boat. Peter didn't just jump into the water. He put on his outer garment and then he dove, or he cast himself. He didn't just jump overboard. He dove in. It doesn't say? Okay. Just fire. All these details. The disciples came to shore in a little boat. They were about 100 yards away, and they were dragging the net behind them. And then now they get there, and there's this charcoal fire with the little fish. And again, this word here is that word for little fish. And then a little bit in a moment, we'll see that they're given the exact number of fish that they caught. What's with all the details? What have we said about John? He was there. He was there. We know because of all the minute details that we've been given. So there they stand. The other disciples come up. They come dragging that net in with them. They finally get to shore, and they get there, and there stands Peter and Jesus, face to face, as the other disciples arrive. And I think they were more interested in the fact that there's food there than the dynamic of what's going on between Jesus and Peter. So Jesus said, verse 10, Jesus saying to them, bring some of the little fish. That's the word we don't see it in our English translations, but there's two words for fish that's used in this. This is the word little fish. Bring some of the little fish which you have now caught. And what does Peter do? I'll go get it. Have you ever been in a situation where it was a little uncomfortable and you were just glad to go do something? I'm that way in a crowd. Just, if we're having a meal, you can bet I'll be in the kitchen, or I'll be doing, don't put me in a crowd. Just put me off to doing something. Peter's like, I'll go get it. Just anything to break that tension, I think, that's there between him and Jesus. Why do you think Jesus said that? Why did Jesus tell him to bring some fish? I mean, did he not have enough? Could he not he fed 5,000 people. Could he not feed 7 men? Why did he have him go get fish?
I think it's an object lesson for him. Not necessarily a parable, but just I want to teach you something here.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Again, there are some of the commentaries that Jesus miraculously produced this meal on the shore. He miraculously produced the fish and the bread. I'm like, why couldn't he just brought it with him? I mean, these could be miracles, but I just see this as a very logical set of things that are taking place. And I think you're right. Go get some of the smaller fish. I was trying to. I know I have it here. Okay. I don't think this is a miraculous meal. I think it's just a real meal that Jesus has provided. But now look at verse 11. Simon went up and he drew the net to land. And there's some commentary. It was a miracle that they could barely haul the fish in, and now Simon pulls it to shore all by himself. I don't think so. First of all, he's a big burly fisherman. Second of all, it's a whole lot easier to pull something up on the shore than it is to pull something through water. The drag of the water. But at any rate, Simon went and he pulls the net into the land. It says it's full of large fish. So all of your translations say large fish there? Or just fish? Large fish. This is a different word. He pulled it, the net full of large fish, 153. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. Now there's two things interesting about this verse. One is obvious. 153 fish. Who sits down and counts other than a fisherman? Sits down and counts how many fish there are. But look at what it says. It was full of large fish. But what is not obvious to us, and we've already mentioned it already, but in our English translations, the word for fish here is different than the word for fish in verse 10. The word in fish 10, and also back in verse 5, is the word for little fish. It's the same word that we find in the story of the feeding of the multitude in chapter 6. This refers to a small fish. I don't know if you remember this or not. It's been ages since we did chapter 6. But the word literally means like a relish. You know, instead of having deviled ham, they had deviled fish. It's like something you'll spread on bread. This is not a fillet. This is just some little mashed up fish that you would put on bread or on a cracker. He says, go bring some of those little fish. And I think Jesus said to bring some of the little fish just to add to the meal. I may be wrong, but I think Jesus brought the bread and brought the fish, and he knew that there would be more. He allowed them, as Amy said, a teaching that he allowed them to supply the rest of it. But what's the deal with 153 fish? I mean, what have you heard? What have you been taught on? Or have you read anything? What's your opinion on 153 fish?
What I read was that there were 153 different species of fish known at that time.
That's one of the things I read. What else? Anybody find anything different? Have you ever heard a sermon on this? I don't think I've ever heard a sermon on this.
There's something about 100 and then 100 and then there were 50 Jews or...
I read, I don't remember, I didn't write that one down, but 100 represented one thing, 50 represented something else, 7 represented something. I mean, you'd be amazed at some of the stuff I've read on this.
My footnote just says that they were accustomed to counting fish before they took them to market.
Well,
So
that's logical.
Your log back to your logic.
Yeah, that really makes more sense than anything that I've read. I mean, I've read stuff all the way from the plausible to the ridiculous. And Linda, from what you said, one of the early church fathers, Jerome, said that there was 153 species of fish in the world. So this refers to every tribe and tongue and kindred and nation. That was okay, except that there's actually more than 153 species of fish in the world. Another one said it refers to Ezekiel 47, where the river of life would be home for a multitude of fish. Okay? Another explanation, well, this one was really funny. This was actually in one of the commentaries, that they counted them so that the 7 disciples could divide the fish among themselves. Except 153 because it's not divisible by 7. Oh, I don't know what the deal was there. Another said that it was a record catch, and they counted them to prove how many there were. The bottom line is we don't know. It was just 153 of them. We don't know why. And I think this is a very good lesson for us. There will be some things that we simply cannot explain. We don't have to know that. I think I've shared with you before, I've got a note in my Bible at the beginning of Ephesians, and actually it can be all over the Bible, that says, don't wait until you understand it to believe it. I don't know why. I just know it's there. And so that tells me there was 153 of them. That's all I need to know. So, here we are. And look at what Jesus said in verse 12. Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. Now, some translations will say, come and dine. Yours may say that.
Just like that, it had the word breakfast in it.
Huh?
In Scripture, that the word breakfast is in Scripture.
Yeah.
I mean,
It literally, the word literally means the main meal of the day. That's what the word that's used there means. And it came to mean breaking the fast. Breakfast. You know, Joe and I, back when we used to eat at Cracker Barrel a lot, we'd say, now we'll go Cracker Barrel and we'll have a good breakfast and it'll last us all day. You know, the main meal of the day. And so this was, you take somebody that works like these fishermen would work, you've got to have a good breakfast. That breaking the fast, whether you're breaking the fast of a Sabbath, which is what some of the commentaries said, or just the fact that they had worked all night long and hadn't eaten anything. But we know, as we noted earlier, did Jesus rebuke them for going fishing? No. As we said earlier, had he ever spared their feelings if they were doing something wrong? No. He always told them. So I don't think they were doing a thing wrong by fishing. I don't think they were leaving their ministry. They weren't backsliding. They, as we said at the beginning, I think they were just going to fish while they were waiting on the rest of their disciples, the rest of their companions. But I think the main thing, as I said at the beginning, I think this incident was just to set up the conversation that we will cover next time. Now, let me tell you how God set me up in this lesson. I mean, I've got my notes here, and I'm going through what I've read, and I'm filling in, and I've got your questions, and I'm answering them, and I'm putting these two together, and I'm just going through just along, and I came to this part, and I said I think that this just is setting up the incident for the conversation that's going to take place later, and I thought that's all it was. And I wrote, this is all about Peter's restoration to a place of leadership. I thought this whole thing, this whole portion of it is just incidental to what's going to happen next. But God was setting me up. And I said, and I'm just sharing with you what I was writing as it was coming. I said, put yourself in their place. You've been fishing all night. You're tired. And you're hungry. Being around water, it just makes you hungry regardless. And then Jesus had to invite them to come and have breakfast. Why do you think they come in, there's the food, they're starving. they got to be starving. Why put yourself in their place. If you've been out working or in hay, in garden, whatever, fishing, whatever you're doing, and you come in and somebody's got a meal there, do you have to be asked to eat? No. Especially if it's a relative or somebody you're close to. Let me have a biscuit just to tide me over to it, No, you're right in it. So why didn't they just dive in? This indicates, look at this. Jesus said to them, now, and I put in your lesson, I think, let me find it. How is this similar to Jesus' invitation in chapter 1, verse 39? I was just reading that and thinking, okay, come and dine. This is similar. And the commentaries did this too. This is why I said I've never read this anywhere before. The commentary said it's just like in chapter 1, when he said, they're saying, where you're staying, and he says, come and see. It's just like in chapter 7 at the Feast of Tabernacles, where it says, come and drink. The word come just means come and do something. And then, I'm working at my laptop, and I've got eSword up, and of course, eSword's got all the numbering for all the words. And I noticed that the number's different for the word come here than it is in verse 13. It's two different words. Now that's odd. And so I look into this word in verse 12, and I see it's a very strong word. It's a command. Come. Don't just come and see, come and drink. This is a pointed word. Jesus was very pointed about it. Come and have breakfast. As I said, the word is stronger here. Here Jesus, these men are hungry. Jesus is having to urge them to come and eat. They were hesitant. John's next words explain a little bit of their hesitancy. John said, none of the disciples ventured to question him, "Who are you?" knowing that it was the Lord. And that word knowing there means that they understood it was the Lord. They perceived. I mean, they knew it was the Lord. They understood it was Jesus. But nobody made a move toward the food. Look at what Jesus had to do. Verse 13. Jesus came, so it's in present tense. Jesus comes and he takes the bread and he gives it to them. Jesus, and he says, and the fish likewise. Jesus takes it and puts it in their hands. He had to actually take the bread and hand it to them. I said, it's like you're at your grandma's. Says, "Oh, here, have another piece of pie. Take more." But it's more than that. I mean, these men are hungry. I mean, they had to be. But Jesus had to take the bread and the fish and put it in their hands. I didn't pick up on that until I got to this very point in the lesson. And I was writing this, and I understood the stronger word, "come and eat." And I didn't read that in any of the commentaries. I went back and looked. It's not in any of the commentaries that I have. We read through that, and I did when I read through it the first time, and I'm sure you did, just the way it's worded. He took the bread and gave them, and the fish likewise. Doesn't that read just like the sacraments? Just like Paul writes about in Corinthians, just like it was in chapter 6, he gives them the bread and the fish likewise, and the same way with the sacraments, here's the cup and the bread likewise. It's just the way it's worded reminds us of the sacraments. And all the commentaries on this particular verse are all about the symbolism. But I don't think this is just my opinion. I don't think this is about, the symbolism's there, but I don't think that's what's happening here. Just imagining these men there. And they are so hungry. And they are also so hesitant. I can't explain what happened to me when that hit me. I just started crying. How often are we like that? Jesus is offering hope and peace and comfort and forgiveness, and we just stand there broken and don't take it. We don't even reach for it. He has to take it and put it in our hands. I don't know about you, but I just see that. Take this. And that's exactly what he's saying to us. And there again, that word is little fish. The fish relish. I said, deviled fish on a cracker. But there's that hymn, little is much when God is in it. And then John tells us, verse 14, now this is now the third time that Jesus was manifested, made his appearance known to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. And he bookends this with the first verse by using that word manifested. John is literally saying, this is real. Jesus was real. Jesus was really there, and he really fed us in more ways than one. But there's still that situation with Peter. You know, just in the way this reads, I don't think Peter has said a word this entire time. I don't think he said a word since he got to shore. And so Jesus will deal with Peter next. And that's what we'll cover next time. So, did that answer your questions, thoughts, questions, comments?
I didn't think about this when I was doing the questions until we were going through them tonight, but we were talking about Peter taking that outer garment and putting it on. And it brought to mind when they were having their meal together and Jesus washed their feet, and Jesus took off his outer garment.
Yeah.
And
It's the same word. Yeah.
And he told Peter, Peter's like, you're not just going to wash my feet. But what Jesus said to him is, you do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you will understand. So do you think it's come to fruition to him at this point? There's my Lord. And I need to put this outer garment on. And I need to come and present myself in a manner worthy of him, because I have denied him. Now I'm going to come and face him.
Yeah.
And I'm sure all the other disciples were probably honing in on his demeanor in the presence of the Lord.
Yeah.
And that's why they're all hesitant, because Peter's hesitant. Lord, I've denied you.
Yeah. And if Peter's hesitant, Peter, who always jumps in, grabs, I think that's a really good point there. I think Peter is acting impulsively, but with that thought of, I want to be presentable. I don't think it's like the commentary said, in order to present yourself before someone. I don't think Peter has thought that through in that manner. It's an impulsive thing, but still with the thought of where he's going and who he's about to see.
And then Jesus asking him the question, I think back to God talking to Adam and Eve, where are you?
Right.
He knew where they were. He needed them to answer.
Yeah.
And I think that's the same kind of situation. He needed them to answer, because I'm about to show you something.
Right.
I'm about to show you can trust me.
Right.
You have been with me for these 3 years, and now I'm getting ready to go away, but you can still trust me. Know that your needs are going to be provided.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to look for them.
Right.
Seek after
Yeah.
them.
There are all of those symbolic things in this. I think you're right. And a lot of the commentaries went that direction. And Jesus is showing them that he provided for them as they walked together those however long that they were all together, the 3 years. He met their needs in the upper room. He told them that he was not going to leave them orphans, and now he is providing for them. Again, there are all those pictures that are being filled, and also a real event that's taking place there. So yeah, I think that's right. That's good. That it is all of that. Any other thoughts? All right. I mean, it just, I finished up and I said, you set me up for that, didn't you? Sometimes it just happens that way. All right, well, let's pray. Father, we thank you so much. I mean, your word is so exciting.